Historical development of e-commerce. E-commerce in the 1970s and 1980s. The historical development of e-commerce demonstrates how technological advancements, economic changes, and consumer habits have converged. This evolutionary process paves the way for new technologies and trends that will shape the future of e-commerce. E-commerce traces its roots back to the late 1970s. Initially, commercial transactions were conducted using electronic data interchange, EDI. In the early 1990s, with the proliferation of the Internet and the emergence of the World Wide Web, WWW, e-commerce became more accessible to individuals. Giants like Amazon and eBay established e-commerce at the center of consumer life. Since the early 2000s, e-commerce has undergone significant evolution due to innovations in mobile devices, payment systems, and marketing techniques. E-commerce in the 1970s. The roots of e-commerce date back to the late 1970s. The concept of e-commerce in the 1970s was not as we know it today. However, during this period, some crucial developments laid the foundations for electronic commerce. The initial steps that marked the beginning of e-commerce included electronic data interchange, EDI. Developed in the late 1960s and 1970s, EDI enabled businesses to electronically transfer documents using a standardized document format. This replaced paper-based documents for invoices, orders, and other transactions, automating business processes. The development of EDI played a critical role in the formation of e-commerce. Teleshopping. In the early 1970s, some television programs began offering viewers the opportunity to purchase products directly. This was one of the first steps in offering consumers the opportunity to shop directly from their homes. Minitel. Introduced in France in 1978, Minitel was a videotex service that allowed users to access online services via a telephone line. Users could make travel reservations, access weather information, and even purchase certain goods and services through this system. ARPANET. In the 1970s, the first online transaction in the US took place over ARPANET. This was a drug sale between the Stanford Research Institute and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This event is considered by many to be the first real e-commerce transaction. These developments were the initial steps that laid the groundwork for today's e-commerce ecosystem. The 1970s went down in history as a period that gave the first hints of how technology could transform commerce. E-commerce in the 1980s. The 1980s marked a period when e-commerce truly began to evolve, and many foundational components started to take shape. The technological, institutional, and cultural infrastructure necessary for e-commerce to transform into its current form was established. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, with the development of the Internet and the World Wide Web, WWW, the missing pieces for the proliferation of e-commerce began to fall into place. With the growing popularity of online services on personal computers at home, the first online purchases were made. Some significant developments during this period include CompuServe. In the 1980s, CompuServe became the first major commercial online service provider in the U.S., offering consumers electronic mail and other online services. Users could purchase news, weather information, software, and even some goods and services through this platform. Screg. Founded in 1987, Screg was one of the first online payment platforms that allowed developers to sell software licenses online. Standardization of EDI. In the mid-1980s, a standard for electronic data interchange, EDI, called EDIFACT, International Message Format for Electronic Data Interchange, was developed. This facilitated data exchange between different computer systems for businesses. Online shopping. In 1984, a system called Gateways, created by Tesco and Videotex in the UK, allowed many customers to experience online shopping over the phone for the first time. This is considered one of the first steps in modern e-commerce. Increasing commercial use of the Internet. By the late 1980s, the commercial potential of the Internet began to be better understood. However, the infrastructure and protocols necessary for trading on the Internet had not yet been fully developed. Online banking. Towards the end of the 1980s, some banks began offering online banking services to their customers. This was one of the first steps towards the digitization of financial transactions and laid the groundwork for the development of e-commerce.